Football stories. One of them, I'm sure, will be the NBA Finals with the Celtics and the Mavericks. But one of the parts about the Celtics and Mavericks, which I never put two and two together, is this story. That their head coach, Joe Mazzula, is a West Virginia grad, played basketball there, and also was a little bit of a, at times, chip on his shoulder, a little rebellious or whatever. So West Virginia, home of Joe Mazzula, the head coach of the world champion Boston Celtics.
Yeah, good for West Virginia fans that get to see one of their guys go and win an NBA title. Thanks for that start to the show as a Mavericks fan. yeah, good for West Virginia though. But yeah, I don't want to do too many congratulations. But the Celtics were the better team, and they got it done last night, as you mentioned, and they are world champions, and deservedly so. It's a really great basketball team, and he did a great job as the coach. It's not always easy to just be an NBA coach or a pro sports coach, but I think in the NBA these days we've seen our fair share of egos and how guys can just get tossed to the side because of the superstars and just how all that works. And for Boston, they've managed to have a boatload of superstars and also have a young head coach, and it's all blended together really well. Took them a long time to win this latest title. You would think, just based on their history, that, yeah, sure, they won one like 6 years ago, right? Nope. They won one like 8 years ago, right? Nope. It's been a while. So they got it done this time, and, they were the favorites going in, and they were clearly the right pick and the right odds-on favorites because they dominated that series for the most part. So, yeah, good for them and good for Joe Mazzula and good for West Virginia as a byproduct of all that.
One of the stories, and then we'll get to some other college football, some other notes as well. Dr. Carolyn P. Atkins had a speaking course, a public speaking course at West Virginia. Students, athletes speak out, and apparently she had a massive influence on Mazzulla as he was in college and, learning how to, release some things that he was feeling. But he is a West Virginia grad alum. Congratulations to him. Now, Louisville, the AD at Louisville saying that it is time now, and I think this is obvious, but time now that what athletic departments, he's speaking for Louisville, is what they need, not what they want to spend money on. And there's a lot of graphics here. We're not going to read all of them, but there's a lot of graphics here in this story. And we'll hear from Tim Sullivan, who wrote the story, at around 4:30 today. I think we're definitely shifting to an attitude of what is needed as opposed to what is wanted. If our marketing department has 8 staff members, do we need 8? If our senior leadership team has 10, do we need 10? That's a scary proposition for people to think about it. And basically all the other quotes that are a part of this story, and Tim Sullivan, again, will join us. We've had him on before to talk Louisville. Just that it is time for not the waterfalls and all of that, not that some programs won't still do that, but it's time that you spend whatever dollar you have, you need to spend it on what matters, and especially since a lot of that money is going to end up going back to the players.
Yeah, I mean, I feel a little weird at this point getting so into the weeds on some of these things because, it just, I look back to just being a fan of it all, but it's, impossible to not have to pay attention to the other things now because they do so directly affect the on the field. They affect recruiting, they affect the type of teams you can put together, they affect what conferences you're in, they affect a lot of different things. So it's necessary to get into the weeds on a lot of topics that I don't know how much people cared about them maybe 15 or 20 years ago, but they weren't as directly related as they are now because of player pay. So this is the era that we're in now, and you heard a lot of boogeyman stuff initially about players getting paid and how that would be the death of the sport and all that. I think that, that was a bit over dramatic, but there was with those warning calls or those scares, there was also in between or around that the talk of, the collateral damage of paying players and what that could turn into, and does everybody quite understand what they're walking into? Now, granted, that was some of the universities saying that, wanting you to pause and not keep walking forward, but I also think there is an element of agents and lawyers and people who stand to benefit of just bowling through without thinking too much about the collateral damage of it all. And if that's what they needed to do for their clients, so be it. But I think as we've been speeding down this pathway now for a couple of years, you're starting to see, like, we're getting into that time of like, all right, what does that collateral damage look like as we now are allowed to directly pay players, and what could that turn into? And one of the fears, at least mentioned early on, is, you know, other sports and what happens with those, and what happens with money that would, you know, normally go to column A, and now it's instead going to this brand new column C. And so what happens to column A, or what happens to what column B would normally get? So, yeah, I just think that's the reality of every athletic department right now. For the most part, there's certainly some that don't have to worry as much about it in the Big Ten and the SEC. But for everybody else, I think you're scrambling. I think some of those programs are still going to have their ups and downs. You know, Michigan, Ohio State, Texas, they'll probably never feel it because they're just so massive. But even I think some of the non-schools of that breed that are in those conferences, with even all the money they're making, I think there's still going to be some tough decisions to probably have to make in some cases. But certainly if you're not in those leagues, then there's inevitably going to be some tough decisions about where the money goes ultimately. And let's face it, as popular as you want women's basketball to be, or as much as you think the men's tournament's undervalued, or if you think baseball's suddenly going to become a big moneymaker, it's all about football, ladies and gentlemen, and it's going to continue to be that way. Now, there might be some money that comes basketball's way eventually, but that's wishful thinking at this point, right? I mean, that's just hopefulness. That's not actual, hey, we've been offered this much more for our basketball broadcast or anything along those lines. That's what you hope if you're Brett Yormark and probably Greg Sankey and everybody else. But, yeah, there's going to be tough decisions, and there's going to be less of the, I think, the waterfalls and the things that we mentioned previously, but there's going to be effect on the sports as well. And I don't pretend to know what that will be, but I think that's inevitable. And I do wonder if we look down the road. You know, I'm not trying to do the whole fear-mongering thing of, like, you can't pay the players because then swimming will cease to, you know, I'm not trying to be like that, but I do wonder, once we get some of these questions about Title IX and whatnot answered, of, are we barreling towards where, yeah, there's a lot of these Olympic sports that are just going to get, you know, tossed to the wayside, basically. Probably not at Texas, probably not at USC, probably not at schools like that still are making tons of money, but I do think there will be a ripple effect of some sort. I don't know how there won't be at this point. So, yeah, that's something you have to keep in mind when you're talking about investments and the money that's coming in is if you want to continue to make money, a lot of that otherwise wouldn't be going to paying football players is now going to be going to paying football players.
By the way, there's a lawsuit in Florida. The ACC is trying to say that Florida State or the state of Florida has no jurisdiction on some of what is going on. There's so many different angles to this lawsuit between FSU, the ACC, and what is next. Matt Baker today, if you watch his timeline, there is a Leon County judge formally says he has denied the ACC's motion to dismiss FSU's lawsuit on personal jurisdiction. I am there on the conclusion that ACC has entered into a business venture with Florida State and Miami to engage in, for lack of a better term, a sports media business in Florida centered on FSU and Miami home games.
So for the Explain Like I'm Five crowd, of which I'm very much one of those, I saw a couple of comments that really make this as clear as day for everybody who's not following this, on a day-to-day basis, which is basically a bunch of people in Tallahassee and ACC country, I think, and then Realignment fans who are hoping like the next shoe drops and this all, turns into a massive avalanche of other moves. But I still think we're kind of a little bit of ways from any of that. So basically today, the best way I saw it summed up was from a couple of different people, like Charlie at Coxosaurus, all right? He said, FSU is like, let's do this in Florida court, and ACC's like, nah, we're from North Carolina, and the judge is like, nah, y'all do business in Florida. That's basically it, right? So the ACC didn't want the lawsuit in Florida. They want it, on more of their home territory. Florida State's like, no, we want this in Florida, home field, and yeah, y'all do business here, so it should be in Florida. No, it shouldn't. And the judge says, no, y'all do business in Florida. The lawsuit's going to be in Florida. So that's going to continue on in Florida as far as the jurisdiction goes. So FSU was able to show that, yes, they do business in the state of Florida, and that is therefore the proper jurisdiction. And the ACC was looking to dismiss this case because it wasn't, the proper jurisdiction, whatnot. And so they've been denied that request. And so all that means, as best I can tell, is A win for FSU, and I guess byproduct Clemson and whoever maybe you want to lump into that. Not a huge win by any means. Nothing substantial that I think like erupts from that today, but it is a win nonetheless, and small wins maybe eventually add up to a big win, but I think we're still a ways away from that, at least the way things appear right now. That could always, change, of course, but that's just sort of reading the tea leaves. So, yeah, not what you wanted to hear if you're the ACC, not the end of the world either, though. So this thing will continue to trudge along for who knows how long. That's the question is who knows how much longer they keep going back and forth before maybe getting into a room and settling this and saying, hey, FSU, cut this fat check, we'll let you go. And then everybody else can fall in line and figure out their part of this. But we're not there yet. We're still at the wrangling over court, over jurisdiction, and trying to get those types of things decided.
Well, and it could change by the end of the day, or other things can be said by the end of the day. But that's a long, Brian Murphy, who covers the ACC, not a judge, not a lawyer, know nothing about Judge Cooper, might be the best dude ever, but can't imagine running a courtroom the way he has with delays and frequent breaks, off the top of his head, monologues. I'm stressed out just watching him run the courtroom, which Matt Baker said, imagine living 4 hours away with a wife and kid wondering when daddy will be home. That's Matt, who's covering the trial. Yes, sir, Garrett?
Yeah, so while we're talking Florida State and Clemson here, before we go ahead, we have a question from CFB Plus where he's asking, random thought, and I don't think this is true for any second, if the Big 12 uses private equity, could they pay for Florida State and Clemson to come into the Big 12? We all know, from my perspective, if they leave, they're going to the Big 10 or the SEC because of the financial disparity, whereas right now the ACC is above the Big 12 in finances. What are y'all's take on this?
Yeah, I tend to believe that all of this battling to try and get out of their ACC deal is not to just eventually land in the Big 12. I just can't imagine that that's the case, and I can't imagine you would go to all these efforts and go the routes that you've explored, which is potentially going private equity to try and get out of your deal years ahead of time. I can't imagine all that is just to go to a conference that is arguably not even like eye to eye with the ACC. Now, I know Big 12 fans, I'm on your side, you know that, but just in terms like overall payout, like the ACC is like slightly ahead if you want to look at it. Now, granted, all that falls apart if they lose teams like Florida State and whatnot. I think they'd obviously add value to the Big 12. But would they add so much value, and would that make sense to then have such an investment from private equity that they're still able to all pay that back and make the money they would be making by just going to the going to the SEC or the Big 10? I hope that makes sense, what I'm saying there. I don't know. That sounds like a much more uncertain proposition, CFB Plus, than just doing what it seems like they're trying to do right now, which is go that direct route to a conference where, yes, they're going to probably have to pay a big buyout, but if you're going private equity anyways, why not just do that and go where you ultimately want to go, where you're insured of a sure thing paycheck every single year that's not going anywhere and will never go anywhere for the Big 10 or the SEC, versus the various gambles that you would still have joining a conference like the Big 12, because then who's to say like Kansas still doesn't, leave at some point in time. And then I think that if you added a Florida State and a Clemson, you're on the sturdiest ground you've been in since the conference was formed originally, like before Nebraska left and before, all that started. But there's still a lot of borrowing of money and whatnot. And it seems like that would be a more indirect path with a few more stops and potholes and things like that versus just going straight to where you want to be and where you'll be secure. I think the Big 12's got to kick tires on any idea possible, but I just don't think that makes sense for a Florida State to go that route.
Why would they then get all of this money, if they do, and then give it to somebody else?
Great question.
That's as simple as, from a non-legal brain of mine, why would you get all of that money and then not keep it yourself? Does it make your conference better if you were to add a couple of teams? Sure. Especially if you get the right 2 to 4 teams. Sure.
Right. That's the thing with the realignment stuff in the Big 12 is I totally understand it, and it's entertaining and whatnot, but at some point of like we just saw the payoffs this past year, and I know that those are expected to go up and everything like that, but look, Florida State would add value to the Big 12. I just don't know if it would be to the extent of the value they would get from, going to the SEC or to the Big 10, and if the Big 12 would add enough to where, Yeah, it's just, I don't know. I don't think the money adds up the right way for the Noles in that scenario.
You know, I'm of the opinion, and I know you have felt this way, and I think even though we understand the value and how it pushes the needle or moves the needle when it comes to realignment, there is so much more to be done with this ACC, FSU, Clemson, whatever lawsuit, North Carolina. It's interesting because it could affect college football. But you could drive yourself crazy talking about this every day, and we actually, in some cases, do.
Well, I mean, it'd be kind of hypocritical to say that when we were talking about the Pac-12 all last summer. Now, granted, there was an urgency to that there's not necessarily with this. I know Florida State fans feel urgent. I know, fans of schools like North Carolina and whatnot probably feel the urgency. But this does have more of like, this is a legal process that's drawing out potentially for a long time. But I think the hope is that, at some point there's enough smarts on both sides, and this is the hope, obviously, that you go get in a room, you settle this, and you cut a check, and you decide, okay, Florida State, you owe us this. Florida State goes to their private equity people, cut us $500 million.
Where are they going? Are they going to go to the Big 12?
The SEC or the Big 10?
That's what I'm saying. But when it comes to the Big 12, as far as what they're going to do, as far as what they might do with the other two conferences, yes. But the Big 12 would be the last decision or option on their mind.
Right. Yeah.
That's what the question was about. The private equity, would it allow them to go?
I'm not asking the question. I'm going off what you just said of like why the talk about it and all. I'm saying like because the hope is that if you're a Florida State fan, this doesn't happen a year from now. It happens like next week. And that's why I think they're hanging on every word. And for everybody else that has a dog in the fight, they're basically hoping that this creates the ACC falling apart, which I'm not sold on that either, and that turns into the Big 12 adding teams. I think that's pretty simple. They want to see Louisville. They want to see, in a far-off dream, like Miami joins the Big 12. I don't necessarily feel like that's happening anytime soon, but that's the hope of some people, or North Carolina State. So there's people that just like realignment, and there's people that want the Big 12 to expand and be a certified, surefire number 3 conference, which they would be if it were to all fall a certain way. The problem, I think, is that when it's like on the daily, it's not moving that fast. And it's kind of like you can talk the same thing 1,000 times. And so maybe that's where you're coming from. I don't know. But that's where the interest is
the difference
what it could
between
affect.
where the Pac-12 was at this time last year to the ACC is the Pac-12 dam broke. It was broken. Water was coming loose. The ACC still has a dam that's intact, even though there's like little possibilities of water getting loose. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and I understand that, and I'm telling you that there's people that don't necessarily feel that way, and so their hope is, and there's a lot of just noise. I understand the
hope.
For sure.
I understand the hope.
There's a lot of noise, but hope is what carries Twitter. Hope is what carries the entire conversation. That's why it never ends. It's because there's hope that your school is going to get into this league, or there's hope that this league falls apart. And so I'm not saying it's based in reality all the time. A lot of times it's absolutely not. A lot of times it's just nonsense in some cases, depending on where it's coming from. But there is reason to watch this and go, this is going to have massive effects. Now, does it need a daily breakdown? No. But if it were to get settled this week, then what are we talking about? We're talking about the Big 12 all of a sudden being on the hunt for some schools. And so that's why
what did today's decision by the judge do to change anybody's mind of what's happening with the ACC and Florida State? It's just one more legal win, right? Does it really lead to anything?
No, not necessarily, but I'm just, I don't know. I think it's notable for those people following along with it, and it's a story that's going on, so it's worth mentioning.
Well, no, I think you and I are talking about two different topics.
I guess so.
Florida State today may have won something in the court, right? But it doesn't change anything when it comes to, like, they're leaving the ACC. There's a lot more. My point was, you can drive yourself crazy if you look at every legal decision with Florida State, Clemson, North Carolina, whoever in the ACC. To me, it's different than where we were at last summer when the Pac-12 was literally, they were falling apart. Now, if that gets to that point where the ACC's fine, the thing about the Big 12 is he's using, will the private equity money, will some of that be used to bring Florida State and whoever else to the Big 12? My comment is no. I don't think that's what they would use it for, because I don't think that's ever going to be an option for them to use it for.
I think we're talking about two different things, because you're still answering CFB Plus's question, and I'm just answering in general why people are talking about it. I'm not still trying to answer his or her question. I already answered it. I already said that, yeah, I think that wouldn't make any sense for Florida State to do, or North Carolina for that matter, because I don't care how many times we hear, well, they don't officially have invites. I feel like once they get the free and clear, they would have invites. I'm with you. I'm not trying to go down this pathway of like talking about this every single day, because I don't think there's enough to talk about every single day in regards to this. I think this could also drag on in courts for quite some time, but you're talking about this particular question. I'm talking in general. Why are people talking about it? Because there could be multiple schools affected. Now, I think that gets overplayed to play on emotions of people and to, give them some false hope in some cases of this is the biggest news. And it's like, it was just a filing was sent in, and that's not a major game changer. It's not the countdown to Armageddon or anything like that. There's a lot of that nonsense, but to each their own. If you want to be that invested into it, then by all means. I don't care for the dirty details of every little filing, but I do think this was just worth mentioning in passing, which was all I was trying to do. So a minor win for Florida State today.
All right, so there's that. And speaking of the ACC, SMU, of course, joining the ACC. In fact, on July 1st, they're going to have a big celebration. They announced today a record-breaking fundraising year. Heading to the ACC, they raised $159 million in the athletics department. And on July 1st, it's a Monday, I think, when they do join, and there's other conferences and teams that are getting together to celebrate. When they do, I'm sure we'll get the AD Hart on the show to talk about that day up in Dallas area. But $159, as those who have money, even more reason to open the wallets because of what's next for them, which is the ACC, after years of kind of wilderness.
You said $159. $159 million.
I let that graphic, I guess.
Yeah, no, this was funny. So to answer your question from just moments ago, why does it matter to people? They just joined a conference that's possibly falling apart. So that's why it could matter.
Well, they're not worried about it because they just raised $159 million. They're not worried about it, but don't think in their meetings they're not watching what the hell's happening with the lawsuits. That's
exactly
sure.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Is like, yeah, so they're celebrating right now, but don't think for a second there's not an SMU fan, as braggadocious as they may want to be, on Twitter or something about their new home, that's not sitting there going, wait, what if this were to happen? Where would that lead us? And so that. See, what happens is you go, what if, and then you go all the way down the pathway, so all of a sudden you've created like a brand new conference from scratch, and that's like too far down the road for us to get on this radio show, and too much fantasy booking for basically what's going on right now, because we try to stick to mostly reality. But when you ask of why does it matter, because there's an SMU fan somewhere out there who's maybe really into it, and they start to see this ACC stuff, and whatever happens with this Florida State court case, however long it may take, could have a direct effect on that school, and whether they are Power 5 for like a couple of years, or whether they are basically back where they started in a slightly better conference. And so that's why it matters.
No, it would be a crushing blow to have all that. And the next thing you know, that conference is falling apart. By the way, from Dundee's, I hope the Big 12 doesn't get into the business of adding teams just to add them. Not every addition meets added value. They're not going to add another program, another university, another college, or anything to the mix that doesn't bring in revenue that's above and beyond what they're getting now. They've already had teams that were a part of the original 8 when Texas and Oklahoma story came down that have had to take a little bit of a haircut. They did that to build a little bit of what they have as a reservoir of schools and colleges or whatever, programs, 2 different additions of 4. They're not adding anybody else. And if they do, I will lose my you-know-what. And I think so would you, and so would anyone else who's a part of the Big 12 Conference. Enough of adding teams just to have a different number without everybody getting more money in return, starting and effective from this day forward.
Well, after seeing the latest payouts, there's some that would argue they shouldn't have added some of the schools they did add. I know there's some anti-Cincinnati folks out there. I know there's some anti-Houston folks out there. I'm sure there's some anti-BYU and UCF perhaps as well. I haven't seen as much of those, but I've seen some of the others. And, again, why does the ACC thing matter? Because people who look at the future of the Big 12, like or SMU or like Florida State fans or whatever, you go, okay, what does this mean for us? And I think there's too much put on the Big 12's position here because the Big 12 has nothing to do with anything right now. They have nothing to do with the court. They have no influence. They have no say. They could rattle the cage of the Pac-12, and they did. They did over and over and over again. And in some cases, they didn't even need to. The Pac rattled its own cage and then blamed it on the Big 12. But that's not necessary here. And that's why I don't think you've heard a lot of like the kind of vague statements coming from Barrett Yormark. And when he's talked about business, we've tried to say, and we're correct in doing so, that he's not talking about just simply realignment. But I think because the Big 12's on this kick the last few years, and I think the idea of we were basically dead, and now not only are we 4, but we could be 3. And we could be the strongest non-SEC, non-Big Ten. Now, I'm not that tribalist. Like, I'm not sitting here going, like, with my Big 12 cap on, like, we got to be number 3. I want the league to continue to succeed. But at some point when you're changing the name and you're changing this, like, yeah, when does it suddenly become something different than it was? And I think if you keep adding teams, how many original teams are there compared to new teams? Is it really the Big 12?
No. That's
because
why I don't even think whatever they name that conference, don't use a number. Don't use 16. Don't use 12. You mentioned why it could be 18 by next year. Just name it a whatever. But there are 8 schools left. Not even 8 from the original Big 12. Take out TCU, who's among the 8 that survived. So I guess
take
you
out
would
West
say
Virginia.
Take out West Virginia. So it would be 6.
Yeah, 6 of the 10 are from the original Big 12.
Yep.
So at what point
6
are you
of the
even
16.
the Big 12?
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot of new fans that are Big 12 fans because they've joined the conference in the last few years. So, yeah, I think that when you have the argument about the name and whether it matters or not, it doesn't. And for some, the Big 12 is not something that resonates well. So I think that's kind of the conclusion I came to at the end of last week is, call it the All-State 12. Or originally I thought you should include Big 12 in there because you fought all these battles to presumably be on the other side of a war. And why then shed your name? But at this stage, if you're just, of the mindset of, do whatever you have to survive and to be number 3, then what is the name? And then certainly the more you add teams that weren't even a part of the league originally, really what is that name? It's just a name. So I'm one of those that I'm not trying to see the 20-team conference. I don't have interest in that. I want to see teams play each other regularly. I want to see real rivalries developed. I want to see regionalism matter. I know you can't have all those things at all times, but I think the more and more you spread out, it sounds fun, like you're conquering new territory. It's like, now we're here, but like I'm not making money off TV dollars and whatnot. Now, it's interesting, the TV dollars, because that trickles down to the schools and their recruiting and everything else and popularity and all of that, and it allows you to grow if they are good numbers, but yeah, I think that's one of those where now it almost feels like for some people like a conquest thing, more than does it actually make sense? Sure, we'd lose like maybe $2 million per school, but we got the North Carolina mark, like that's the kind of stuff that I don't jive with either. I think there's definitely opportunity to grow and to make sense in how you grow, particularly with some ACC teams that could become available eventually, but that time is not right now. And it doesn't seem to be anytime real soon. But you do have to be just on the lookout if you're Brett Yormark. And at the same time, where are we going? Maybe it is to where there's 3 30-team conferences. I think that would suck. But maybe that's eventually what it's going to, or 3 24-team conferences, and that's the new FBS or something. Maybe that's the case. I still think that would suck, but maybe that's what it is. And in that case, you'd want to be the all-state whatever, right? But beyond that, I don't love the idea of like, let's add another 4. Hell, let's bring in 6. Let's get the whole, it sounds fun for TV programming, and it sounds fun for maybe creating some new storylines. But in terms of like a product that's easy to digest, I think it would just be a little bit too much.
Oh, no. I mean,
we're complaining about a power ranking of 16 teams. Now we want to go 20, 22,
Garrett,
24.
Would you then, if all of it, this is hypothetical, which can be dangerous because then somebody takes this segment and they say, hey, 365
no, we
sports.
Don't do that.
We don't. But it's hypothetical.
Right.
If, in fact, the North Carolina schools became available, but you did not grow any financial value, do you add them to your conference?
I mean, at this point, no, it's all about finance. It's all about generating more revenue to catch up with the SEC and the Big Ten. So if I'm adding somebody, they better add revenue or it's pointless.
Yeah, I don't. Again, I don't even know what that would do to the contract. You get Charlotte, I get that, but it just
I can't imagine
you can
that,
go on and on and on with those scenarios.
Yeah, I mean, and some people do that, and for them, go for it. But I think if nobody's adding money, then at this point, if you're the other schools, you're going, all right, how many teams are we adding before we actually make money? We've added a bunch of schools and we're making less money. And I understand there's down the road plays. Like, I'm sure an argument would be like, well, you got the Charlotte. Like, that's where I kind of zone out, to be perfectly honest with you. To each their own. But that's where I'm just kind of like, that's just too into the weeds for me. But I get it. All right, maybe the long-term play, it's like Big 12 Mexico of like, you won't see the results now, but in a few years you would. Now, maybe the scenario you say it's a brand new state, that probably would add some ways. Now, would it add substantially, or would it be like $500,000 for every school? I don't know. But
it does bring in a chunk of millions. Then why?
Right.
Yeah. Eventually,
because eventually you think it's maybe the long-term play, or you just see like eventually this is all going to turn into like 30-team leagues, and then maybe that's worthwhile. But I don't think that North Carolina is a gettable brand for them right now. I wouldn't imagine so. NC State, on the other hand, yeah. But I'm with you. I don't like the whole idea of adding to add.
No, yeah. I mean, just eventually, please make more revenue. And, of course, Brett Yormark's trying to do that in whatever ways he's doing that. One quick note, and then we come back with Mike Scarborough. He covers LSU. His thoughts about Les Miles and suing LSU for some of the vacated wins that might cost him a chance to be in the College Football Hall of Fame. A&M winning last night. This is a stat. This is from Gabe Bach. He works for Texags. It's the second time in 3 years that they have now reached the College World Series Final Four. Prior to Jim Schlossnagle, who was at TCU and did a great job with them, the Aggies had 2 wins total in their history at the College World Series in Omaha. And it's the second time in 3 years they've gone 2-0, at least started, or gotten into the Final Four in the College Baseball World Series. More on all of that with Craig and Off the Radar at 4:45. They got a hell of a combination of pitching and hitting.
Yeah, they're really good. They're dealing with some injuries as well, but they do seem kind of like a team of destiny. I still hope that those two fans, regardless of whatever the rumors are or the story is behind Florida's coach, I still think that was just classless. I think that was totally out of pocket, and I think those two are just real scummy for those actions. But that's not the whole A&M fan base. For the rest of the fan base that actually knows how to handle their liquor, I think that they're on a hell of a ride right now, and it could very well end up with a championship in Omaha the way things are shaping up. So that would be a really big deal, as we talked about last week, for an athletic department in A&M that's won some things here and there, but never won the football title in modern day, and never won basketball, and so out the men's basketball. So they've had like women's basketball and things like that. But I think to win baseball would be.
They won it 1 year with Dale. No, I'm sorry, they did not. I'm attempting. All of a sudden, I looked at your LSU hat and got completely confused. You're talking A&M. Sorry about that.
Yeah, so they would. Baseball's not a big money maker, obviously, but I still think of it as a top 4 sport in college, and still one of the premier sports. And so I think to go win a College World Series title would be a massive deal for that athletic department and really kind of change the feel. So yeah, that would be huge, and they're well on their way right now.
They are. All right, when we come back, Mike